Okay, Kinesiology 101. We're now going to have a look at Chapter 7, Environmental Wellness. On our wheel of 8 different wellness areas, environmental wellness, again, balance is the key. And environmental wellness is probably the one chapter that has the least amount of information in it, but one that probably we don't think about as often as we should. Like all the chapters, the sole purpose of this chapter is just to ask students to be aware, be mindful, know your facts for you, not for us. This chapter and any other prompts you think about your individual lives and situations, taking the facts and information and applying it as you best see fit. Environmental wellness is awareness and engagement of the upkeep of environmental quality. It includes one's access to clean air, nutritious food, sanitary water, and adequate clothing. For any of you that might be education majors, you might think about the fact that you oftentimes learn, I think probably in one of the first education classes you have, is like the basic needs, right? And that if a student hasn't satisfied their basic needs, then it makes it very difficult for them to learn beyond that or think about anything beyond that. Basic needs, of course, being food, shelter, water. So environmental wellness here, we're talking about making sure that we are aware of the impact that all of us as humans face globally anytime our basic needs cannot be met. Okay, now that might seem pretty obvious, or it might seem to be not as important to some of you because you've never experienced a time in which you haven't had clean air or maybe nutritious food or sanitary water to drink or adequate clothing and whatever it might be. One of the things that we talk about when we talk about environmental wellness, we talk about sustainability. Sustainability is meeting the basic environmental, economic, and social needs now and in the future without undermining the natural systems upon which life depends. So in other words, how can we go through life and get everything we need without doing harm to our world, to the earth? Okay. All of us have a carbon footprint. Okay, carbon footprint, total amount of greenhouse gases produced to directly and indirectly support human activities, usually expressed in equivalent tons of carbon dioxide or CO2. Your carbon footprint is the sum of all emissions of CO2 which were induced by your activities in a given time frame. So let me simplify it. If you are a commuter to campus, if you go to campus and you drive a car to campus, you have a greater carbon footprint than the person that it's likely you have a greater carbon footprint than the person that lives on campus and walks to class, right? Because you're not using or developing carbon dioxide because of your activities as much as someone who isn't driving, just because driving tends to be the most obvious and the one that produces the most greenhouse gases by individuals as opposed to large corporations. UIndy as a whole has a carbon footprint, obviously by the electric that's used as well as a number of other things. We can lower our carbon footprint in a lot of ways. The easiest one is to limit driving, but it's also turning off lights, saving electricity because of the burning of fossil fuels. So you have all kinds of ways that you can actually improve your carbon footprint. As I said, when you drive a car, engine burns fuel. When you heat your house, it burns oil, gas, or coal. Unless, of course, you're on some sort of clean energy, such as solar energy and that sort of thing. The food that you buy, how it was produced, it also will have a carbon footprint. And so, again, that's different ways that you can limit what your carbon footprint is. If you travel by public transportation, you limit it. obviously flying in a plane, operating your computer, use of plastic bags, recycling, all these things can lower your carbon footprint. Greenhouse gas emissions, gases that trap heat in the Earth's atmosphere, and this is what we typically blame for the overall, global warming. And again, many of you are going to have different feelings on the importance or how threatening global warming is. That's for each of you to decide, but science does show us that it is happening and that we as humans have a big impact on it. Electricity production is the largest, and transportation is the second largest when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions, and the biggest thing to blame. Industry, commercial and residential, agriculture, land use and forestry all have impact on greenhouse gas emissions. This is a breakdown of what I just told you. Electricity, transportation, you can see where the largest are, commercial and residential, industry, agriculture, and so forth. Little graphic here that shows what contributes to greenhouse gas emissions. And you can see how basically agriculture does part of it, even our homes down to 6% and that sort of thing. So I'm repeating it several times here, as you can see. Energy, computers. What can you do to save energy with your computer? You can turn it off. You can obviously look at various ways to power a computer. I do know a guy that powers all of his electronic devices through his bicycle. Whenever he's on an electronic device, he has a little generator thing that produces electricity, and the only way he can use his computer is to pedal the bike. So when he goes on a bike ride, he pedals the bike and so forth, and builds up. Or keep in mind, this is in his home, stationary bike, and it powers the computer for him as he generates electricity. He's not great when it comes to the internet and so forth because he can't emit and produce enough electricity to really keep it going. But it's an interesting deal. Energy, cars, and fuel. Again, greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide emission. Here's a little more that you can see energy, cars, and fuel, and how that greenhouse gas emissions in transportation. The fact is we're not going down. We're basically staying the same, slightly increasing as time goes on. I'm sure during the pandemic, we've lowered the amount of greenhouse gas emissions. I did see something where when during the pandemic, where we've seen a massive decrease in industry, where factories have been shut down for a long period of time, where smog decreased and pollution decreased. And so you can see that those do have a large effect. Hybrid cars are now becoming popular. Of course, electric cars are becoming popular, but you're still using greenhouse gases when you use an electric car, just using less fossil fuels. Okay. Reducing miles travel, doing a few things, making sure things are energy efficient. A good example would be, most of you do not remember a time when this would be the case, but now all washing machines and refrigerators, things like that, all have to be Energy Star efficient and can only use a certain amount of electricity over a certain amount of time. I think this was developed back before most of you were born. Wastewater treatment and waste management, because of the homes and commercials and residential sector that we have, produces a lot of CO2. Okay. One of the biggest things we can do, and one thing that I probably hold a little closer to heart than maybe some of the other things, is recycling. I'm a big outdoors person. I love camping and kayaking, canoeing. We do a lot of rafting and hiking and things like that. And one of the things that I tend to do is I tend to clean up as I go along. So if I'm going down in a canoe in the river, if I'm going, East Fork of the White River, something like that, which is near where I grew up, I always take trash bags with me. If I find trash, I always throw it in there, and I kind of clean it up as I go, because nobody wants to be in a river where it's junk, right? And so reduce, reuse, and recycling. When you go someplace, leave no trace. We like to say that a lot. Leave no trace. Don't, if you can go in and out without anybody knowing you were there, and keep things as they were, that's a benefit to everybody. And hopefully, many of you do use recycling and do try to reuse things. Probably the biggest thing you can do is reuse water bottles and stop using plastic disposable bottles. It's very difficult because those are easy to grab and convenient, but the fact is just using your own water bottle, which many of you do on campus. I know that makes a big impact on exactly how much trash we're producing and that sort of thing. Discussion, what can you do to reduce, reuse, and recycle? I think, each of us could come up with a little better way to figure that out. I'll give you another example. In my family, we don't use paper plates to decrease, because obviously it doesn't take that much to wash a dish. So we don't use paper plates, don't use paper cups, things like that, to try and reduce the amount of waste that we're producing. And that's chapter 7. Have a good day and stay safe.